welcome to Daily Debrief from People's Dispatch. I'm Pragya. There's renewed skepticism about the Iran nuclear deal. Indonesia is the latest country hit by the global cost of living crisis, and Indians are celebrating being the fifth largest economy while being home to one of the largest numbers of the world's poor. The Iran-US nuclear deal is in trouble again. In August, top EU diplomat Josep Borrell announced that Iran and the United States have a draft agreement to look at. Now Borrell says the deal is in danger. The JCPOA, as it is known, holds significance for nuclear proliferation and for regional peace. Reportedly, Iran is not keen on some details of today's draft. The new backdrop to the negotiations is the United States seeking new sources of oil or vying for more fuel from West Asian nations. We spoke to Abdul from People's Dispatch. Abdul, thanks for joining us. Abdul, Borrell has said that the US and Iran do not agree on the latest draft released in August. So what is the sticking point seem to be this time?
Well, Borrell's statement is a bit misleading if we see, because the report says the Iranians have conveyed their whatever suggestions they had, and they have, as per the reports in the newspaper, they have the objections about IAEA's role in particular. We know that last few months there has been disagreements emerging between IAEA and Iran, particularly because IAEA chief went to Israel before the review meeting, which was crucial review meeting, and Iranians wanted to kind of some kind of clarification on that, right, which IAEA refused to give. Iranians had also objected IAEA reporting about finding certain other nuclear reactors and elements within Iran, which was not clear, and they did not want the IAEA to pursue it further. But it seems that US is insisting on that. I think all these things should be seen in the context of the US Israel relationship in particular, because there are elections, crucial elections coming in Israel next month, and the present government has to show something to their constituencies in Israel, and Iran is a very important issue. And the government there does not want the deal through before the elections. And it seems there is a pressure. There was a meeting between the Israeli delegates and US administration in last few days, and that has, it seems, worked. We know it is very obvious that it has been reported many times in the media that Israel does not want the deal anyway, because it thinks that is the deal with nuclear deal, resumption of the deal, will lead to Iran becoming more economically strong, which will kind of make it more capable of kind of pursuing its regional policies, which Israel sees against it. So we should see it in the context of the larger global politics and regional politics, which basically is the reason, not what Borrell is stating. What Borrell is stating is basically single-handedly blaming Iranians, which of course is which we understand the politics behind it.
Right, Abdul. Abdul, what is the significance of this deal? Why is it important for the region?
Well, we all know that why Europeans were pushing for the deal as soon as possible. Russians have completely blocked the gas export,
right,
and before the crucial winter, Europeans are facing unprecedented rise in the oil prices. At some time it went beyond $500 per barrel, which is 4 times, 5 times bigger, larger than what was the highest ever.
Right.
So Iranian oil, Iranian gas is a crucial, Europeans have seen it as a crucial source of supply. But I think US is not in a hurry. There is midterm election coming there. And,
yes,
and we talked about Israel also. And it seems that they do not care about what Europeans want at this moment. So the deal is not only, from the European point of view, immediate deal is important because Iran's capability to kind of supply oil and gas, which will kind of help them deal with the problems they are facing, particularly because of their own doing in imposing sanctions against Russians and so on and so forth. Apart from that, the deal is also important from Iranian point of view, because sanctions are not good. The American sanctions which have been imposed since 2018 has kind of, though the effect has gone down because of the moves Iranians have made with China and Russia, but still it has an impact on the Iranian economy, and they want the deal so that they can kind of revive their economy the way it should be, given the fact that Iran is one of the biggest reservoir of oil and gas. Its current economic status does not basically reflects its real potential. And sanctions are responsible for that to some extent. It is also important for the global politics, of course. This lifting of sanctions, increasing supplies of oil and gas will also help the larger world. Apart from the Europeans at immediate basis, it will also help the larger world because the price rise is a global phenomenon now, and that will help the world in many ways if the Iranians are on board and the deal is restored. Apart from that, it is also very important for the what we call the nuclear disarmament and the world peace. That is quite obvious. We don't need to elaborate that.
Right, Abdul. Thanks very much for that update. And I guess we still have to see where this joint agreement ends up.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thousands of workers and students have taken to the streets in Indonesia. The trigger, 30% fuel price hike due to rising crude oil prices. Unions say workers will strike unless it is withdrawn, and they want wages hiked. But the Joko Widodo government promises cash transfers to the poor instead. People finding their feet after the pandemic say this won't work as they have to pay for what they need and it costs more. We spoke to Anish from People's Dispatch about the situation. Anish, good to have you here. Anish, can you start by telling us why this very severe sounding fuel price hike in Indonesia and who it affects the most?
So we begin with how the government is trying to reason it. At least in the government's terms, it is because of the ballooning fuel subsidies that are actually becoming a burden, as they say, is becoming a burden for the state budget. They're trying to say that they will try to rechannel some of the subsidies to other welfare programs to deal with the rising cost of living. But when we look at the overall picture, the fuel prices are still going to increase, and that is also going to affect the subsidies that the government is going to give. It will add another $9 to $10 billion into the government budget only on fuel subsidies. This is just the addition we are talking about on top of what already exists so far, which is a huge budget already. And the government's reasoning doesn't stand to scrutiny, because if you look at some of the manner in which they're trying to implement this whole program, it is not going to be sustainable in the long run. It is actually going to affect a huge part of the population. If you remember that the immediate cost will be felt by car owners, which is and Indonesia has a huge car ownership rate. It stands to around 60% when we last checked. And that already shows the large majority of people that are going to be affected. The government is trying to say that only the small minority of wealthy car owners are going to be affected by the taking away of the subsidies, but that's also not true. You will also have to apply for any kind of welfare allocations in the form of cash transfers for in replacement of these fuel subsidies, which will also not be enough. So this shows a very sustainable sort of manner in which the government is trying to implement this program. On the other hand, if you look at the overall impact that it is going to have, it is going to be kind of disastrous, because if it can actually derail a large part of how the government is trying to contain inflation, which Indonesia so far is, if not utterly failed, it is struggling to contain it within its own parameters. So we will have to wait and see how it is going to have a bigger impact.
Right. So, Anish, why is it that this government finds itself in this situation? They came to power with a host of promises. And what are the factors that have gone into the current decision?
So in some of these factors, as I've pointed out, the problem is obviously a larger fuel subsidy budget that is definitely affecting the coffers of the government. But on the other hand, there is also, it is, if you look at what has been happening in Indonesia for the last few years, the manner in which they are trying to implement several neoliberal policies, including deregulation of mining sector, deregulation of the finance sector, trying to attract foreign investors. The fuel subsidy is just part of this whole neoliberal package. And that definitely is going to affect the bottom half of the population, if not half, like even the majority of the population. If you look at how the wages, minimum wages itself have not, kept its pace up with the rising inflation. Last year, the government increased minimum wages by a little over 1%. And that is at a time when inflation rates are already close to 4.6 to 4.9%. And with the fuel subsidies, the economists are estimating that it will go up to 7% by the end of this year. That's a huge jump. And it will be the biggest inflation hike in maybe a decade, and no comparable increase in wages will be seen at the same time. So definitely it is going to have a bigger impact, and it is obviously part of this whole larger neoliberal policy that the Jokowi government has been pushing for. Obviously his party has been trying to push for containing fuel subsidies for more than a decade. Actually, you had even the Sukarnoputri administration having to back out of a fuel subsidy scheme, cutting down a fuel subsidy scheme in 2003 after much protest. Now we can actually expect some of these protests to come back, and the same protests that fought against the omnibus law to come back and bring back several of those same demands. We are already seeing demands for wage increases, the increase in minimum wages, and also not only not cutting down on subsidies on fuel, but also bringing down costs of public transport and expanding public transport, which is also something that Indonesia lacks, even when we look at some of its major cities. So a whole host of these demands are already coming up, and you have workers' movements and students' movements being at the forefront of these things. So we'll have to wait and watch the larger impact, because it will obviously take the multiplier effects will only be seen in the next few months. And that is how things are right now.
Anish, and for now, they say the protests could extend into strikes, which will last until December. Thanks a lot for joining us. Can a country where most people earn less than rupees 25,000 or 313 US dollars every month be an economic success story? India seems to be doing that thanks to an IMF note ranking it the fifth largest economy. There is the expected celebration, but it turns attention away from zooming inequality in India. Most Indians are much less prosperous, and at least a quarter of Indians are poor than the GDP numbers indicate. We go over to senior journalist Paranjoy Guhathakurta to understand these figures. Paranjoy, thanks for joining us on our show today.
My pleasure.
Paranjoy, now the IMF report has sparked some amount of celebration in India with the fifth largest economy, overtaking the UK. But at the same time, there are reports which say that Indians have not recovered from the pandemic. Which is the reality?
It's how you want to measure the economy. And if you want to look at it in terms of GDP or gross domestic product or national income, you're going to get a very, very imperfect measurement of the state of the economy. And, it doesn't take into account per capita income, doesn't take into account inequalities within a country. And if some people are getting a vicarious pleasure thinking though India has overtaken the country, our erstwhile colonizers, Great Britain now, Little England, of course, but that's all right. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. In India, I'll just give you 5 points
All right.
as bullet points, and you can arrive at your own conclusion. Look at the population of India. We are supposed to be, we are supposed to have overtaken the People's Republic of China, or about to overtake the People's Republic of China. We are supposed to have 1.4 billion plus, 141 crore people in this country. How many people does Britain have?
About a
Seven,
tenth.
7 crore. Well, yes, 770 million against 1,400 million plus. Look at India's per capita income in US dollars. It comes to about 2,200 per person. Look at Britain's per capita income. It's 47,000 US dollars. Look at the inequality in this country. There are various estimates, these are debated and discussed. The top 10% of India, they're supposed to own 57% of the total income of this country.
Right.
And 90% of Indians earn less than 25,000 rupees.
Every month, yes.
That's right. I mean, not all are supposed to be below the official poverty line, but I mean, compare a country like India with that in Britain. Yes, Britain is going through a bad time. There's recession, there's inflation, there's all kinds of problems, but nothing like a country like India, where an estimated close to 200 million people, 19 crore, are supposed to be malnourished, undernourished. And this number alone, this 190 million or 200 million Indians, they comprise over 3% of the population of Great Britain, the United Kingdom. You also look at the Human Development Index. Britain is at number 13. And where are we? Out of 189 countries, we are towards the bottom. We are 131.
Right, so Paranjoy, which one of this is the real India, the one which has a high incidence of poverty and malnourishment, or is it the one that is being talked about, which is the fifth largest economy in the world? How do we reconcile these two realities?
You must not reconcile them because they are very different realities. Is India Antilla, where one of the world's richest men, one of India's richest men live in that huge skyscraper in the middle of Mumbai? You don't have to go very far to see how the shanties and the slums where poor people live. Is this the India which says that, we are the world's largest democracy? And this is a country where what happened to Bilkis Banu happened, where a Muslim woman was gang raped, her child in front of her was killed, her mother was raped in front of her, and 11 convicts who were jailed are given remission. Is this, which India are you looking at? There's always been more than one India. The India of the well-off and the India of the underprivileged. You could argue that the divide, the inequalities of income and wealth in this country have become wider than ever before. Yes, historically we've always been unequal, but there are several studies that indicate that India is today arguably one of the most unequal countries on planet Earth out of the 200 countries.
Right, Paranjoy, one of the important events of the last couple of years was the global pandemic. And has India recovered from that blow?
We are recovering. We haven't recovered, despite the numbers that are put out by the government, which is actually statistically misleading when you look at one quarter's growth figure and compare it with the previous quarter.
Right.
You forget two important things that happened during the pandemic. For the first time in the history of this country, in the first quarter of, that is the period from April 2020, for 6 months, India's economy shrank. One of the reasons was this brutal sort of, what should I say, lockdown imposed by the Modi regime. And we also saw something during this period. Not only did the economy shrink, we also saw internal migration on a scale never witnessed before.
Right.
Literally hundreds of millions of people moved away from the cities to the rural areas. Never before in the history of India have you seen this kind of reverse migration from urban areas to rural areas. So when you look at those numbers and you want to look at it, only compare just the period between April, May and June of 2022, you're not going to get a correct picture. So I would say we are yet to fully recover from the impact of the pandemic and the harsh lockdown.
Right, Paranjoy. Thanks a lot for joining us. And that's all we have today from Daily Debrief. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with another episode tomorrow. Visit our website, peoplesdispatch.org, for more such stories. And follow our discussions on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.